really what we call the Broadband Committee or a steering committee meeting. Certainly everybody's invited to participate. After this meeting, which is due to end at 6:30, we'll have more of an open house and a broadband, we call it the broadband team, members and any public and citizens that want to know more about broadband planning in Goldendale. That meeting starts at 7. So we'll have more folks hopefully for that meeting as we talk about broadband and how to improve it here in Goldendale. So with that, I guess, Scott, you're probably the lead off, so
thank you.
Away we go.
Appreciate it, Larry and members of the committee. Mr. Mayor, I appreciate your time tonight. Again, Scott Keillor with BergerABAM. And Ethan and I are very pleased to be here in Goldendale, helping you kind of get your community arms around this idea of a new infrastructure and expanding broadband services for economic development, for homes, home businesses, for the future of Goldendale. And I think it's, it's an honor to be selected, so we're happy to be here to serve you. We appreciate the committee's time. We appreciate the reschedule. I think we've all had enough snow for the winter, and the melt begins today. At least according to my phone.
Thank you, Scott.
I'm just saying, I'm projecting it's going to warm. And besides projecting the weather, we're here to kind of help kind of bellwether your opportunities with broadband. And that really is an effort that involves the entire community. So hopefully you'll have some more time for our open house tonight as well. Just quickly on the agenda, we want to talk a little bit about the overall strategies and purpose, what our work scope kind of entails through the summer to deliver this broadband plan. This is something that, to the city's credit, has resulted from the hard work of folks in the room to outline broadband needs in a state grant that helped fund this particular effort.
Before you leave that, Scott, sorry for interrupting.
Please.
Not only did we receive a state grant of $50,000, we also received almost $20,000 from Clickatack County to provide the match to the city's match for the broadband study. So I want to make sure there's credit given to Clickatack County for their participation as well.
Very good point.
Thank you.
Very good point. So that goes to the whole idea of the community working together to benefit from this infrastructure. So we have a work plan that involves several meetings with the Broadband Planning Committee, and we also have several open houses, including tonight and one we'll schedule out in the spring. And we'll wrap up the study proper this summer, and then the state grant guidelines say that it kind of checks in boxes for all of the elements that need to satisfy that grant, get wrapped up by the end of the calendar year. So there'll be some hours that we'll have to kind of shepherd this along to make sure all of our products fit in to check those boxes and help Larry deliver on the grant. The primary elements of the work include a model code study, and our team has been working, looking at national standards and some local communities as well as the Goldendale Code. And the primary objective there is to understand what it means for the community, for the internet service providers or ISPs to have some certainty around your land use code structure when it comes to telecommunications, what's required under franchise agreements, what barriers, if you will, might exist that we could streamline to help folks feel more comfortable investing in broadband within the community. And also, what are other communities doing on a national model code scale, places that you'll hear from Ethan about, such as Paulsbo, who's got a good example code that helps with that certainty. So we want to inform and help the city to be a good enabler when it comes to getting on board and expanding broadband speed and services to meet community needs. The market analysis is underway. You don't see every member of our team, but we've got an economist that's taking a look at what are the institutional and employment land opportunities, whether they be kind of agricultural and tech-based, whether they're in the manufacturing sector, whether we're servicing emergency services needs, county, city, all sorts of institutional uses, as well as the residents. And the residential need really goes to the way that we live and use higher speed internet services in the household, and the ability for folks in this economy to be a little bit more footloose, do telecommuting, those sorts of things. So those things will be a part of our market analysis that's forthcoming for the group to review. We also have the system layout and cost component, and the state grant requires that we take a look at, on a broad view, what Goldendale has in terms of the current internet service backbone and infrastructure to the community at a broad scale. And we're working with the ISPs, and we've been through general stakeholder interviews. Appreciate Ken's here from Home Telephone. We've talked with Wave, with GorgeNet, CenturyLink, and these folks really are sharing at a level that's appropriate for public consumption, so that we understand, hey, where can we improve as a community? And then that particular gap in the system will have some costs associated with that are developed by our engineer with experience in broadband development for communities. And it's also approved and informed locally by what we can learn with the ISPs on what this looks like in terms of cost for an aerial installation or an underground installation of, say, per foot or per mile of fiber or infrastructure. So that element will be what we would call a planning level cost estimate. It sort of gives you a global view of what it might cost to address those gaps. And we put this together in a final report that'll come through committee and ultimately to the council. I'd like to recognize that we do have council members in Mr. Mayor on the committee, so we appreciate you being here to kind of be that sounding board and that feedback to council as we work through the process. So we're beyond the snow day. We had to reschedule, but as you've heard, we have a bit of time in the schedule. I had some dates, and we're going to have to reschedule some of this. So we have time to complete this through the summer, so we'll get back to you with an updated schedule. Questions just about the work plan. We'll talk a little bit more about strategy and what we're here tonight. We really want to hear from you as a committee on your strategy for broadband. It ranges widely from sort of communities that provide really support and enable private investment for the benefit of the community, to those that help seek grants that the private side may not have access to some communities actually do run utilities through franchise to expand into broadband. So that's part of why we're here. But questions about sort of our purpose tonight, to hear back from you, tell you a little bit about what we've heard, and then to understand the vision of the community and the strategy of where you want to position yourself in terms of your future for Goldendale and how you get there with broadband. Anybody out here have questions? Okay, well that's a general overview. I talked a bit about the project strategy and our philosophy. Our last broadband project for Porter Richfield was to help them install or to look at the feasibility of what they're installing now, a dark fiber network. So it's a very different plan. It was for the Discovery Corridor run by the port in the Richfield area, Richfield to the center, and there are a lot of expansion from the types of things I talked about. Hospital would be another one that applies to you. So some key drivers that you have in parallel, but they were in a position to make a change in state law so that they could, as a port district, invest in dark fiber. They got about $1 million, and now they're building that and leasing it back. I think that the project strategy for us is to do as much research as we can, bring it to you, and look at how that matches with your vision for broadband service here, and then provide some recommendations. Another element of the work plan that comes out of this is a pro forma, not just recommendations, costs and gaps, but what that kind of looks like in terms of financial outlay and return over time, which can be a good general tool as an enabler for the city, can be a very good specific tool for an investor, an ISP or other entity, or both. So those are the sorts of things we want to bring you, all the tools to help you decide where you'd like to take the community. So with that, I'm going to give you a brief overview of what we did and what we learned from the ISP, and I think Ethan will be able to give you some more specifics. But the takeaway that we got from talking with the 4 ISPs on 1 or 2 occasions was that they're very upbeat about service delivery here and their ability to, and their commitment to invest in the broadband service for Goldendale. If you've been here a while, from what we've heard, it has improved, so it's evident in the services for many users, I hope. And if it hasn't in your neighborhood, we want to find out why, and see if there is not to point at any one service provider, but to see what the city could do to help this system kind of improve overall. The speeds are either coming up or slated to over the next few years, and we got information on costs, and we also learned a bit about, you know, concerns, and you'll sometimes get an air of caution because these are really proprietary businesses, and we'll only get so much in terms of what's beyond what we can learn on the websites, but we are trying to gather enough information to put together general maps and systems.
And as we talk about broadband, what's your definition of broadband? What is the definition of broadband? Because I hear it kicked around, but I think we ought to be talking something pretty concrete. Here's the minimum.
You bet.
That's broadband.
This is a great segue. I like the question. I'm sorry I didn't get to it yet, but there are minimums, and this grant is a result of being underserved. So we're trying to hit a mark. And Ethan, if you don't mind starting with that question as an introduction to what we've learned about where you are and where you may be heading. Ethan?
Well, so the grant that the city received from the State of Washington Department of Commerce is given out to what Scott mentioned as underserved communities. And the state defines underserved as a community that has less than 100 megabits per second download speeds and 20 megabits per second upload. So that's the definition of underserved. There's also what they call unserved. Luckily, Goldendale doesn't fit into that category, but that's slower than that. So Goldendale is in the underserved category. So in terms of the ISP work that we did, we, as Scott mentioned, interviewed 4 different ISPs that currently provide service to Goldendale: HTC, Wave, CenturyLink, and GorgeNet. And those were telephone interviews. We may have some follow-up in-person interviews with them. But we were essentially asking them 4 different things, and one of them was kind of about what the existing picture is, what their existing infrastructure is, what their existing speeds are, what kind of prices and packages that they have. And then we kind of transitioned over to, well, what does the future look like? And that included talking to them about, well, what kind of upgrades are you planning? And what kind of phasing would you be rolling out? The infrastructure along?
And before you go much further, would it be fair to answer the question directly that broadband is a range of higher speed internet service? So in the context of this grant, you have sort of what's considered substandard, 100 down, 20 up. And
right.
The goal is to beat that and move that forward. And you'll talk a little bit about what we've heard, if that helps give some context.
All right.
Yeah. So then Scott, I think, also briefly mentioned that we talked to them about their costs and how much it would cost them to upgrade the broadband system in Goldendale. We've got kind of a variety of responses there, and it depends on what kind of infrastructure you're talking about again, because, you know, fiber, that's kind of what is seen as the wave of the future by a lot of people. That's sort of your fastest type of infrastructure. That tends to be a little bit more expensive to extend or provide upgrades for. Then you have DSL, digital subscriber lines, which go through the existing television cable that's usually already in the street. So both of those are types of broadband internet. And then there's other technologies that are less common, microwave, and what have you. So it's broadband, as you're suggesting, is kind of a package of technologies that can provide high-speed internet.
So what are you guys trying to bring in, the fiber or just trying to upgrade the speed?
Well, so one of the points of our work is to sort of assess the feasibility of and what that would look like, whether it's fiber or whether it's something else. And so that's one of the outcomes of the study that we're working on. So I don't know that I can answer that yet, but that's one of the things that we're going to be forming some recommendations on. And then kind of the fourth thing that we talked to them about was what each of them considers in terms of expanding their system, you know, whether that's demand, cost, both, a combination of both of those things. So I'll just hit a couple high points in those four categories. Some of this may be things that you already know because you live here and maybe you're subscribers to these services. But there's, in terms of the infrastructure that Goldendale has right now, there's kind of a variety of infrastructure again. There's one particular provider that has a lot of DSL lines in the community. And then sort of on the other end of the spectrum, there's some that have fiber lines, not a lot of distribution yet at this point, but there are some fiber optic lines in the community. Two of the providers were able to give to us their system maps, and we're working with some of the others to see what they can provide to us, and that's sort of getting at that question of what the system gaps are. So we're going to put all of those on a map at some point and kind of identify, well, where are the areas that are not served. And then service packages and costs, I'll just kind of give you a range there. I mean, those fell anywhere from 15 megabits per second download for roughly around $50 per month, on up to 1 gigabit per second using fiber at about $250 per month. And that's, of course, not saying that, as we just said, that fiber is not available to the entire community, but that's something that the providers are looking at providing in the future. And then, as Scott also mentioned, all of the providers were pretty positive about their plans for the future. A lot of them have plans within the next 6 months to a year to improve their services, which is good news for all of us. And those again, those improvement plans vary from extending existing cable DSL services on up to providing additional fiber in the community. In terms of infrastructure costs, I mentioned there's like a real wide range there as well. One of the providers mentioned that their average cost to extend is about $20,000 per mile, which equates to about $3.79 per linear foot. Another provider said they were about $25 to $35 per foot, and so that kind of varies based upon whether it's an aerial installation or an in-ground installation. Again, what type of technology they're talking about providing, as well as the strands of, you know, in the case of fiber, as well as the number of strands that are going through the conduit. So in terms of service expansion decisions and how they decide what they're going to do in the future, a number of things got mentioned there. Cost was the number one thing, and so they look at, well, how much is it going to cost me to extend lines into the community, and can I get that back out in X number of years? And 3 years was one of the numbers that was mentioned. So cost was the number one thing. Demand also, but maybe less of a consideration. User density, which is also sort of just a form of demand. And, you know, pretty interestingly, I thought one of the providers mentioned that competition isn't necessarily an ideal thing, at least from their perspective, in terms of providing additional infrastructure in the community. Because if there's one of their competitors is already has plans or is providing fiber, then they're not also going to provide fiber to sort of duplicate that. So they were suggesting potentially developing some sort of exclusive agreement, franchise agreement with a provider to specify speeds and service levels and costs and so forth, populations that would get served, and then having that exclusive contract with just that provider might actually result in something better than sort of trying to encourage competition. So I think those are some of the general takeaways from those ISP interviews. Are there any further questions about those? Great, thank you. Just let us know if you have questions.
Great. Thanks, Ethan. I appreciate that the committee's running an open format. We want to make sure that we're getting your input and questions. I might direct those to you initially, and then we kind of expand those for all of the folks on the team and in the community. But we want to talk a little bit about the business model, your goals, and your vision for broadband. And I think that before we even really talk about the goals and where you want this to head, it would be very interesting to just run a quick exercise, and I think we'll probably extend this on into the public meeting. And I'm just going to go ahead and put the committee on the spot, so I'll give you a minute to think about, what does this look like in 20 years? You can remember 20 years ago, we were all, hoping for this day, and here it is, and how fast things can accelerate in terms of our access to broadband services. So when I ask the question, what is your vision? I want you to put yourself in Goldendale 20 years from now, and really not what is it, because that'll come back to the goals in terms of how you got there, but what has it produced? What do you see in the community? Are you seeing neighborhoods that are more connected, access to universities, access to jobs? Is it just simply being able to run large terabits of data between universities and medical providers? Is it telemedicine? What is it about Goldendale that makes this project so valuable? And where can we really kind of imagine ourselves in 20 years? And I know Larry will provide an icebreaker for me. What do you see out there, Larry? Come on, give me the 20-year vision, and we'll go up and around to the committee, and I'll just I'll spare the pen for now, but I'm gonna capture some key vision ideas from the committee, and then we'll open it up.
Well, I see in 20 years, we're going to have more of what's going on in the back room. And that is that we have people that are able to conduct business from where they sit today with people all over the world. And the speed that can happen, the speed at which that can happen, at a speed that everybody can enjoy, not flipping out and going crazy with all the blotches. And it's a clear picture of what's going on in Kenya, for instance, and with somebody sitting back here in one of these offices and sharing with them ideas about how to do a better job at developing a water source or something like that. It's just a way for the whole world to be better connected. And the way they're going to be better connected is through high-speed broadband service. And that's what I see making Goldendale a better place to live because they can conduct business from their home or office, depending on how if you're not on a trunk line, for instance, it's going to be harder if you're not, if you're connected on a trunk line, like a fiber line, I guess is what I'm trying to say. You have a much better chance at making that happen. But then how far out can that go? So I'm not looking just for Goldendale, I'm looking for outside of Goldendale as well, to help bring those folks together.
So, first of all, I lied. I picked up the pen. Apologize for that, Larry. But I want to grab these ideas. I said eventually I would, but what I heard you say was that there's this global connectivity, you can increase livability. And then I heard about business. I don't know exactly what goes on in the back room. But are you thinking about
Well, when I say the back room, let me tell you what goes on in the
Yeah,
back
I want to
room.
understand that.
A lady that lived out in the country couldn't get good broadband service through HughesNet. It's a satellite service.
Got it.
And so she was having trouble doing her job because her job was to be a project manager at OHSU in Portland. And she just, download speeds were horrible and she couldn't get what she wanted. And so we said, well, we got broadband service here at City Hall and we got some offices back there that are not being used. Why don't you come in and you can at least be in Goldendale, not have to travel back and forth to Portland and do your job. And so she's back there doing her job and loves every minute of it because she's got great download speeds and she can do her job with a 15-minute commute or whatever it is versus a 2-hour and 15-minute commute.
Which goes to livability. I mean, this idea
Exactly.
that you can not only retain new job opportunities for the youth, but you also have folks that want to come out here, enjoy the space, the natural beauty of the region, reasonable housing costs, all that. It's all wrapped up in that. That's a great vision, and I'm happy about what's going on in the back room. You say back room, I have to ask, I don't know what's going on there.
We probably should have a different name.
The back room.
The back room. Sweet B.
Suite A and B are occupied.
Oh, that's great. Yes, Mayor Cannon, did you have something you could share about?
Well, I do, mine probably a good bit more general, but 20 years from now, I see not only that it'd be a far stronger economy for Goldendale or the county or the region, but also far improved services and that capacity from the hospital, university, the observatory. So many very strong parts of the city in this region that they'll be able to reach anybody they want globally and provide services locally that will be remarkably different from what they are now, and just a much greater scope of that service.
So it's almost super regionally, kind of like a hub. It goes out from there.
That's what we
Think
hope
about
for. Yes.
your folks in the hinterland of Goldendale, but where that can reach to is really infinite across the Wilderness tour.
And this is a world market, so we want to be in that market.
Great.
By the way, while there's a lull, I will say there's water bottles over here if you're interested.
Oh, great. Thanks.
Some cookies if you're interested. Get up anytime and have some. Go ahead, Scott.
Jonathan?
So everything Larry said, first,
I gave him the spotlight first, took the pressure off.
from a health perspective, some of the things that we'd like to roll out better would be connected medical devices that would do alerting. So if somebody didn't open their pill bottle that day and they were supposed to take a certain critical medication, we could receive the alerts. Right now when our home health and hospice folks go out, a lot of times we have cloud-based EMR systems and they can't connect in some homes in the county and into the service population. And then also, improved reliability, where right now, the wrong backhoe in the wrong place can take us down for a few hours as far as just the service itself. And so the more we become dependent on the cloud, the more we need a reliable connection to the cloud. And so that's not like a daily occurrence, but at the same time, some form of redundant data connection to the community.
Was the connection point about doctors and records and processes, I'm sorry, just a quick,
So, connected medical devices themselves, heart rate monitors,
got it,
I forget the diabetic,
sure.
glucose and those kinds of
No,
things,
that
blood
helps.
sugar monitoring. Yeah, so just connected, and then, as we expand virtual office visits, those kinds of things, those will require a quality connection as well.
Good.
So if people are in rural areas, a lot of the problems that we have right now are people make appointments and then just never show up, and a lot of that has to do with transportation. And so if we can perform virtual office visits as opposed to in-person visits, we could remove that transportation barrier to our community as well.
Really good point. And this really hits home in the news with what we've seen going on in Clark County and with the outbreak and the idea that maybe you don't want to come right into the medical office. So this virtual office visit, and I love this angle on the transportation challenge. It's very important, I would think, for an area here, like Goldendale. And other thoughts beyond kind of your niche that you see for the community? I mean, those are great points. Everything Larry said.
Yeah, most of what Larry said. We've noticed already people move in the community that work in sectors that they can be rural. Their office is in Portland, but they live in Goldendale and they work in tech companies and those kinds of things. So, we've had people not accept positions because of the quality of data connections for spouses, for example, who work remotely. And so if they can't be guaranteed that they're going to be successful in their current position, then they're not going to accept a position with us. So it's come up that recruitment, which is already difficult sometimes in a rural area like ours, especially for physicians, we've had that additional barrier. So reliability, redundancy, quality.
Recruitment. It's important.
Yes.
Absolutely.
I know I worked on a lot of employment land studies, and it's interesting you overlook the little stuff. Like the first thing that the site selection committee does is checks how many bars they have on their cell phone. It goes on from there. Okay, thanks for sharing. Milan?
Yeah, it's, back on economic development, I think not only for individuals, but it'd be great for recruiting businesses that come in our area. And I really feel that, and we've been working on that for some time as the city, and I think this would be a great help. Also, a question I had is just, would it help the emergency services, would it help out the dispatch center, the police department, even fire departments? That's just, there could be a benefit from that.
Very important. The EMS services, critical to the health of the community. Business growth, we're kind of like individual people. We're either growing or we're not. We don't get to stay the same. So these are very important pieces. I'm interested in maybe one of you or the audience will help us with also technology and agriculture and wind and the energy stuff. That's really been sort of the latest wave of expansion beyond government here lately. Andy, do you have some thoughts that you could share?
I think everyone's almost covered everything. I just think that the connectability with everyone, being, businesses and everything, is even just the social aspect of it. Being able to connect with anyone in the world is just really important.
Yeah, let's face it, we don't all have the funds to travel the world, but you get a sense of it shrinking as you use the internet. It's a pretty amazing tool. Anybody want to venture into energy or ag or anything, or shall we throw it open? Are you seeing that sort of, if not recruitment, benefit today, or gap in service kind of for recruiting or serving some of those newcomers? Not necessarily.
Well, the farmers are using new technology of farming, So possibly even more in the future, next 20 years, they would be using it. I'm not exactly sure just what, but then I'm sure that there would be something that could definitely benefit them.
I think primarily what we're hearing about is that the telemetry, the watering of the field, water reuse as water becomes a more precious commodity, how much you're able to regulate that watering. It's a really high-tech machine that kind of helps run the ag business, so I'm sure there would be folks here interested in that.
This county, and because of that, Goldendale as well, is quite an energy center, green energy, renewable energy. And while they already have very, very sophisticated telecommunications, I think it'll go far beyond what it is now and be able to provide services into the grid in unique new ways that probably aren't available. And there's a second thing about Goldendale. Goldendale has always wanted to stay a small city. When I talk to people, they never want box stores, they never want traffic. We have one traffic light in the county, all 3 colors, but that's one for the whole county. But the thing is, with improved broadband, the town can stay small with very, very sophisticated residents working anywhere that they choose. And I think that may solve the way to stay small and yet still be very, very strong.
Yeah, it's a little bit less threatening than a bullet train.
Yes, yes.
That's great. Good stuff. Well, so we did want to kind of talk about this from 20 years in the future. But I think if you add up everything from health, medicine, business growth, ag, energy, all the great stuff from global reach to livability, fostering high speeds to serve hospital, education, EMS, business growth, then you can imagine a place, if you work very hard in all aspects, that maintains its smaller town charm and its identity, but that also has a much larger economic engine within it. So I think that's kind of what you're expressing from what I'm hearing from the group. So before I go to kind of the goals, strategies, and business model, do you mind then if we open this up a little bit?
Yeah, let's have.
So we're just writing down the vision for what this broadband and higher speed internet service could do for your community. Looking out 20 years, and you've been able to hear that, trying to get that posted, you'll be able to see all these also at the open house. But let me just ask if anybody would like to add some vision to the discussion, please.
I loved what Mike said, because I wrote it down, that broadband and high-speed internet will allow people like me to, and I already do it, and I struggle because of the low internet speeds. It allows me to live here. I look out my window at the Simcoe Mountains. I don't have to sit in an office in a big city anymore, and I can still do what I do. But I struggle with internet speed. But 20 years down the road, I think that it could give this whole area the opportunity to maintain its culture and draw highly skilled people into the area because of the quality of life. And so, Mike, you nailed it.
Larry didn't say that.
That's why he's the mayor.
Larry nailed it too.
Talk about big bucks, though.
So you have this idea that you can be more footloose and home-based and enjoy the lifestyle, but
Quality.
additional broadband speed makes that possible, not just for you, but for more people.
Yeah,
All
because
right.
people don't want to go to the office anymore for the most part. And I think the younger they are, the less often that's where they want to end up.
Yeah, isn't that interesting?
Good for them.
I have 2 in college, and all they can think about is spring break at the end of graduation. I'm thinking, who's paying for that? Anybody else? Is it?
You know, I would commend you on agronomics is gonna be huge as it continues to move forward. Farmers are using drones to go over their fields, they're using tractors. They use equipment on their pivots that dump data down through cell phone links. I mean, that is a huge industry, and it's just beginning, and not just farming, but of course the ranching and the dairy and all that. Technology's big. I would be curious though, just to know what kind of speeds that you need to perform these functions you feel are necessary. So for instance, a chat or to download a video, or so we have an idea of how much data we think these functions need.
So you're talking about sort of everything from high-end agribusiness to just home use and the Internet of Things?
Yeah, if you look at your list there, what would, so one of them is like a Skype call, could be equated to potentially streaming Netflix or something. What kind of bandwidth does that take? Or
That
even just a phone call?
is
So that you have it, I guess, it answers more to the fact of, okay, well, what speeds do we as providers need to be shooting for that you feel like is gonna take to run a business? Or to enjoy your house, whatever it may be.
All right, my technical backup is going to speak to this.
Oh, he's-
How much do I need
More
to?
hand- You got a couple
Whoa,
more
whoa.
hands.
You got a
Well, we
hand
got more
over
hands,
here.
so you might
He's kinda
tell
technical
me.
too, but-
Well, you're going to answer this for us. Good.
I would turn this around and say, you know, if somebody is living in Portland and they're getting 10 gigabits for a reasonable price, and that is kind of the norm for the market, that's where we need to be. You know, maybe the cost is a little higher, but because everything that's developed from this point going forward is developed with some baseline of connectivity. And at some point, we fall so far behind that what's out there that you see going by doesn't matter because you can't get it. So I don't think it's a minimum. I mean, the Internet of Things, I mean, 2G works for that. That's not a high-speed connection at all. But being able to do video conferencing from multiple locations, that takes a pretty serious connection. And if somebody's gonna work here with a technical background and they're doing 3D modeling with somebody else in another office, that's a pretty serious connection. So instead of trying to say, you know, what's the minimum, let's say what's the market level, and we need to be there. Because, I mean, I've already heard from customers that are moving out that they're moving here in spite of the connection. They already know they're gonna hate it. And they know there's no good answer. But they wanna be in Goldendale, so they'll build a house and move here anyway, with the hope that it's gonna get better.
Well, so we have kind of the idea of how do you quantify the goal. We're kind of getting at the goal within the vision. How do you actually, do you just target higher speeds, or sort of this idea of what the metro areas are getting, what the world's looking for a market standard? Goes to your question, well, that looks different for different users. I think because we're kind of listening in all ears, we kind of want to be able to address those. So I'm gonna refrain from answering that directly because I don't know, but I think we can find out. Sir?
I work in the IT department for the school district, and we're lucky enough, we have a 500 meg fiber backbone, and we've really been working on upgrading. But I go home 6 miles out of Goldendale, and I think DSL is 14,000 feet, and I'm right at the end. And I've got a blazing 1.5 meg. And she does, and where I moved from, I think it had a 50 meg connection. But she does video conferencing with her family in Ecuador, and just for personal use, it works. If you go to download anything, it's, you know, I just leave it download overnight. But yeah, it's quite a difference in Goldendale now.
So 1.5, your life includes from 1.5 to 500
It's
meg.
supposed to be 8, but it's actually 1.5.
You're not supposed to check on it. You're on a speed test from your rural home?
Yes,
Oh, goodness.
of course.
Well, you get the prize for furthest from home, but I'm glad you do have video capabilities. So thank you for sharing. I think that this really kind of tells the story, that there's a wide range, and there's potential to get higher speeds, but the further out that you go, the more difficult it is. And one of the things Larry and I spoke about with this is what is the reach of the Goldendale Broadband Plan. And it is focused on the city of Goldendale, but we're specifically interested in that being a connected plan. And I think we can still talk about what happens on the edges and in the rural areas. But the economics of that, of course, get a little bit more difficult, as I know you appreciate.
But don't forget
Please.
that we still have a goal or a vision or whatever you want to call it, to be a hub.
The hub,
I think Mike might have touched on that. But by being a hub, then we can support those uses that are farther out from the hub. So, in a sense, we want to look beyond the city limits because that's still our community. We service that area that's outside the city limits, even though they might not be inside the city limits physically, but they still call it Goldendale, and we still enjoy having them here.
be a hub. That's a great goal. Extending service beyond the city limits is part of the plan.
Yeah.
I think that's great. Are there goals? Mr. Mayor?
Goldendale has something very unique to the whole region. We have a world-class observatory that's being completed right now, and it'll be one of the finest in the country. That's going to require a lot of really good capacity for telecommunications and for educational links, thing after thing. It's going to go a tremendous way, but we've got to be ready for that.
Yeah. So, I know there are expansions for the observatory, there's investments, it's a big deal.
It is big.
How does that relate to the study in terms of their ability to serve? I mean, maybe I'm not sure how much broadband is needed to run the observatory. I'm sure there's a lot of data.
Yeah, I don't know the specifics of it, but I know the educational links, not only to our public school, but to universities around the country, could be
Great.
absolutely tremendous for that one facility.
Improve education. I think it falls under that if that's a goal. So you've got very kind of unique, because this is the school system, this is higher ed, this is moving data, but it's also some of the things we talked about, access to agribusiness, tech, wind tech, the observatories. Really pretty fantastic. So, this is not just higher ed, but I think it's vocational and tech. And certainly we want to talk about things like the observatory. Other hands I'm missing?
Do you need a writing break?
Well, I think, yeah, you saw it going. What did you say down there? Observatory. Yeah, I'm probably a little bit tired from that. If you would like to, Ethan, does anyone else need a break, a cookie or a water? I might just grab a water and ask you to think about if the vision is sort of a regional improvement in service to increase livability, telecommuting, telemedicine, ag, and all of that, then what are the goals for the project? I think being a hub to serve the area, improving education, we want to talk about, we can talk and go back again through these sort of business serving and residential serving lines, but what we've kind of set up is a look at the market, understanding gaps where they might exist and how to serve those through the ISPs, and what model codes are. And so I'm just gonna grab some water and ask you to talk to me a little bit more about the goals, how we get there, what the objective is, where we wanna go in the goals, how we're gonna get there. And then, I think we should also talk, about the city's business model. Are you just being open for business, doing a good service with a study that helps, because the ISPs are giving input in, understanding the market and your desires and putting product out? Do you want to be sort of a partner where you can get some lower income, lower interest money to help them expand the service? Do you want to identify gaps or possibly become more active as a partner in delivering the service? So we're seeing kind of these range in communities, and I mean, I don't even say those things lightly. It's a big deal to take on a whole nother utility. And what I've heard kind of to date, just anecdotally, is really very interested in being an enabler, helping this service kind of happen, and very interested in kind of peeling back the layers on the onion and seeing where are the gaps and how do we get there, how do we help our partners do it. But I think we'll want to understand that it'll help us direct the study, the market study findings, and decide kind of where that niche is. And you may not know just now, but I think it's something to think about. And so Ethan, you can pick up your writing hand, and I'll come back to goals here real quick. So, how do we get to this 20-year vision to be a more connected place where people want to live and work, where there are more jobs that retain the youth, and where more folks are coming out from Southwest Washington, Seattle, wherever they may come from, to enjoy the sunshine and the space? What do we need to do, and how can this plan instruct, not obstruct, but instruct this process? We're not trying to get in the way. We want to get out of the way, and you know, this is partly driven by this committee. So I think it's important to sort of understand your sort of goals for the project. And I don't know if I can pick on you, Larry. We're sort of transitioning.
Great.
They echoed your last introductory statements on vision. But
Well,
you definitely want to meet the curb grant, because you got an obligation.
yes.
So that's a project goal. We got to meet the state grant requirements, and we outlined those very briefly.
Well, I've had to learn a lot about internet. I am not internet savvy at all. Not like, is it Steve? Is that?
Gary.
You Gary?
Yeah.
Okay, but you're with the school district though?
Yeah,
right?
I'm the assistant.
Okay, you work with Steve?
Yeah.
Okay. But anyway, he was describing a situation where you have service levels from 500 all the way down to 1.5. And I'm learning that the ISPs service all the way up and down that per second, what do you call it, megabits per second. And so to me, I think the next thing we need to talk about, and maybe that's what you're getting at, is where are those gaps? You know, you've got the 500 to whatever number, and then you've got 100 to 20, and then the 25 and down. What do you guys have?
Well, what do we pay for, or what do we get?
What do you get?
We're supposed to have 3 MIPS down, and it's always less than that, and it's supposed to be 3 MIPS and 100, no, maybe it's 1 cable, maybe it's 1 MIP up. It's never that.
I mean,
And
yeah.
the ping time is absolutely atrocious. You know, even when you do a speed test, it may say it's 26 milliseconds, but it was a second while it was thinking about the 26 milliseconds.
What's that now? Is it for which purpose?
This,
We do business.
Business?
oh yeah,
Business use. Okay.
Yeah,
So-
But how far out do you guys live?
we're 12 miles.
12 miles.
Who's your provider?
Which really is Skylink Fiber,
And they're terrible.
and they're not Skylink.
But we haven't found one that was good yet.
I was gonna say, they're not really Skylink and they're not really fiber either, I don't, it's good marketing.
So I think that the goal goes back to what you had mentioned, that this is a hub. So it's to help not just Goldendale, but the hinterland, which is producing jobs.
Well, and
Yes.
part of it is, when you're looking at what's there now, you need to look at what is the facility. I know the school's got pretty decent connection, and I understand the hospital's got a pretty decent connection, and City Hall has a pretty decent connection, but that's kind of where it ends. Everybody else is on DSL and worse,
Well,
right? I mean, is that?
I really want to echo that. It's not just how fast can we go, it's what are the drivers, what are the anchors, and we want to talk about that on our agenda tonight, because, for example, WSU Vancouver campus, one of their anecdotal pieces on the dark fiber project we did for Porter Ridgefield was they were pulling, terabytes of data onto hard drives and mailing them to Eastern Oregon to move data. And they were doing this, periodically on a regular basis. And then, so they had a real need for big data movement, so the fiber was the key. Is that, and then we're kind of getting, is that the goal? Does Goldendale need to be served with fiber to sort of make that the ultimate goal? Or do you have some users that are fine with their DSL service? Do you have other needs, like within that institutional and employment area, that maybe map out differently? I mean, that's one of our questions we've had. Is fiber the answer? Or is it increased broadband speeds based on the user? And that rural service issue is a real question, yes.
I think a big problem is, I've talked to several CenturyLink techs, and they're working with 20 and 30-year-old wiring, even in the boxes, and it's just old equipment, and that's a lot of the speed problem, I think.
That's a really good point, it represents a gap.
Not all DSL is created equal.
Mm-hmm. So there's going to be some need for physical updates. Feel like we're moving along the agenda pretty good, but we've covered some goals and vision. We're getting into gaps. Do we have specific gaps in service and, considering key anchors? We've talked quite a bit about the schools, the hospital, the county. Are they feeling pretty well served? That maybe if police and fire want more.
Police and fire and City Hall, we are sitting pretty.
Could I make a comment?
You got a comment?
Yes.
The FCC has provided the funding either through the agricultural department and the school, the county, and everybody have been funded through that program and have fiber run into those facilities now. The big gap, this is from 5 years ago, when SawNet and NoaNet came up here. They screwed up their funding situation and did not fiber completely from Vancouver to Goldendale. And I don't know how much since Wave has bought them out, how much of that gap's been filled in. But those facilities have all been funded, the library too. So they basically have, and I know there's I don't know what Wave's got totally, but these facilities can be on a gigabit of service without any problem.
Well, I think it's important to understand, we've not gotten there yet on where maybe the larger trunk line gaps might be, or point to one, whether it's upgrades between the Dalles and Goldendale or Vancouver to Goldendale. Those are things, we're hoping to get some more information from the ISPs and see where those gaps are. But your comments are well taken.
Now, CenturyLink has a fiber that goes from Goldendale to the Dalles. And they refuse to deal with anybody other than CenturyLink.
Who's they?
Well, 5 years ago, I tried to lease a fiber from CenturyLink down to the Dalles, and they don't lease to anybody.
Doesn't GorgeNet work with CenturyLink?
They may buy service from them. But there's, CenturyLink, with their capacity to come into Goldendale, 5 years ago was maxed out. So they didn't have any bandwidth to lease to anybody. And they didn't want to lease to anybody that competed with them. And a lot of what GorgeNet does is DSL over the phone lines so that CenturyLink gets a revenue from it. It's a little muddled on what GorgeNet is doing because they've been here for a long time playing.
So if we're talking about one of the gaps being understanding kind of what the ISPs have in a coordinated system, we've talked a little bit about this. It could be a goal of the committee to look at the franchise agreements for no other reason just to get good as-built and understand what a franchise agreement should be. At least for your purposes, have the data. I think the proprietary nature of the data is something we want to respect and do respect in this process. So we're gonna try to get as much good information as we can, working with the ISPs, and report out generally enough that we have good agreement, if not, going to some more. What else would we do to get more information? So those are the sorts of things I'm talking about, is how do we get that next step in cooperation? And because there are legitimate concerns that folks are running businesses and they want to keep those going. So I want to tread lightly there, but I do appreciate that, infrastructure sharing, to the degree that it can be, could be a good tool for delivering better product, as well as the competition is an important part of it in the community. So I think that might really just be a good segue. If we can touch one more time on the kind of the perceived anchors and economic opportunities. I know we've had some discussions, Larry, and I think we really do want to close this session in the last 20 minutes at 6:05 to talk about kind of the business model that the community thinks is appropriate for the city. So Dana, I don't know, did you have information on who might be asking and who needs this higher speed broadband service to bring their jobs in?
I think the comment that was made earlier is the best way to think about it is it's got to be a box people can check. If it's a box that as they're evaluating your area remains unchecked, you drop way down in consideration. It's not so much, who needs it, it's everybody wants it.
So it's almost the next thing on the shovel-ready test.
Yeah, exactly right.
Okay.
And, your comment about looking at the bars before they get here, or after they get here, I think we're all just babes in the woods when it comes to understanding how well versed a larger relocating business is before they show up.
Yeah.
Probably know more about your town than you do.
They've done their homework.
Yeah. And,
So
and it's just, this is such an, this is like having the interstate go by your house, but there's no off, or your town, but there's no off ramp. That's all I saw now.
So rather than
put a building on it.
And you know, I do think we answered the question. I appreciate that answer, that it doesn't really matter who we're trying to capture. They're looking for this high-speed connection to do business. And I think we've had enough of a discussion coming into this prior and tonight about who's here benefiting from it. We would just, Ethan and I would want to know if, you know, folks are knocking and saying, we're gonna go to the next town because, I mean, that's pretty important to know, or who we're trying to capture. But I think we have a pretty good idea. I like that, interstate no off-ramp. Put that under caps. But that's really well said.
So the marketing tool I think we've got in the rural community world is we've got a really viable, effective hospital. I mean, it's for the, you know, somebody who's 40s, 50s, you know, wants to get out of Dodge, wants to live in a rural area, has a skill set that's portable. You know, one of the things you start thinking about in that age range is how far do I have to go for medical service. You know, an effective hospital is something that a lot of rural towns, boy, that's a thing of the distant past, not even the recent past. And we've got one that's current, and, you know, I think if you're providing the kinds of, you know, you say telemedicine, but it's really sensors tied to your phone, you know, and Skyping with your diagnostician, you know, that lets somebody live 25, you know, 15, 20 miles out of town or even in town. I mean, you know, for that kind of person who's, you know, likely to relocate to a rural area just because they want to live in it, and needs the broadband to be able to bring their career with them. I think one of the things that's going to put us first among equals is, you know, I'm not 50, 60 miles from decent medical service if I make that decision. And I don't think it's real apparent to a lot of people yet that, especially leaving urban areas, that, you know, there's lots of places you can go where, you know, that golden hour is outside of your, you ain't gonna make it in an hour.
Even on life flight.
I think it is an attractive community, and it's not just the rural character, but ability to get reasonable services, medical being high on the list. And you never know. I mean, in addition to Footloose, you might find the old downsizing for retirement can really drive stretching the dollar in a more affordable community. Can be another big attractor. So I think it's good to look at the marketing strong points and just really think about and be cognizant that, you know, today high-speed internet is a business location must. That's good. Other things in terms of goals, vision, anchors, opportunities? Or do you want me to get to the tough questions? Who do you want to be in the broadband world? So you've got this community, and you've got high-speed internet service. You have 4 providers, and I didn't use very technical terms, but helping them along, making clear codes and franchise agreements, and maybe incentives is a level that I've kind of coined as enablers. Because Larry and I spent time talking about it, and he thought, well, yeah, we'd like to help as a community, and the city can help be an enabler. I will report from the ISP interviews, they find this city open for business and friendly. So it's not like you have these big obstructions like some larger permitting communities do. And I don't know, because we looked at things like the opportunity zones and the model codes, if you want to add to that, Ethan, while we talk about what sort of business model we'd like to adopt as a community.
Well, I mean, I think as with so much about this discussion, there's kind of a spectrum of things we can talk about, spectrum of speeds, spectrum of prices, spectrum of infrastructure. Business models are another one of those. And so if you look at what's happening across the country, you can see on one hand that some communities are operating their own retail broadband service. Well, that is not legal in Washington and some other states. So you can check that one off the list. But theoretically, you could be a wholesale provider of internet, so you could build some trunk lines and you could lease those to the ISPs, so you could go that route. So that's kind of one end of the spectrum, I think, and then on the other end of the spectrum is sort of what Scott is talking about, being an enabler, trying to remove any barriers that might exist, setting up model codes that specify what providers have to provide when they submit plans, how long review processes take, and giving them some certainty around those things so they're not spending inordinate amounts of time coordinating with staff, which doesn't sound like it's the case here. But those types of model codes can help sort of be that enabler, as well as financing. And so one of the things that the city could do is, choose to partner with the private sector in getting access to financing from the state of Washington to help them expand their services in the city. So those are kind of the two spectrums. Wholesale service all the way to enabler. There's different combinations of things in between.
And I think that's a good summary. I don't think I'd be far off base to say the more that you go towards, we'll just call it dark fiber or wholesale installation, the higher the risk and the cost as a city. Potential reward, somewhere in between, you really sort of more, and there you're still serving ISPs by selling that infrastructure so they can carry the service to the customer. And then in the middle there, maybe there's more of a partnership where you understand how to get low interest loans or grants, and that they're, maybe through an opportunity zone. We've been still looking at that. There may be some questions on what other projects compete with that, but you are able to, and within an opportunity zone, able to use that tool, which, if you want more details, I'll call on Ethan again, but then, the enabler is right here in the room doing this study, from understanding the market to what the people want to how to deliver it and what you can do within your codes to make that happen in the private sector. So the more you get involved, the more potential risk, cost, and reward potential. But, the more comfortable start is facilitating that private investment, maybe helping with access to capital. Those are the sort of range of things. And I don't think that you have to necessarily decide without getting more information from the study. But the study would benefit by understanding sort of what direction the city would imagine itself going today. There, you've always kicked off. I think we should continue.
And you're saying that a municipal option isn't out there? If the PUD decided they wanted to be the recognized, for lack of a better term, internet service provider, you're saying that's not an option in Washington?
That is correct. The city.
He said the PUD.
I said the PUD.
Yeah, so that's why I'm saying that for you.
My understanding is that the city and the public sector more generally can't provide retail broadband internet service, which means they can't sell to the end user. They could sell to another ISP to use a network that might be owned and installed by the city.
Well, that sounds like a problem. A sharp spear is a good thing.
Mr. Mayor?
I think we're gonna probably, from the experts in the room, need some schooling or some idea of how we work with the ISPs. We want that to really work. But we're concerned that if we make the wrong step, we hurt one of those providers, and that's not our idea. We really want to make this work for people in Goldendale and for them.
I think that goes to goals, work with the ISPs.
Yeah.
So, and that might be, if I were to recapture your words in the language I was speaking, maybe from helping them and enabling them to partnering with them within their comfort level. If they want, you could maybe help serve up some infrastructure, take that next step, but not at the cost of dropping ISPs or competing directly. Well, that does help to explain at least what the perspective of the city might be at the end of this. You're not going first anymore. Mr. Mayor. Other thoughts on, what the business model might look like for the city, and certainly can we have an ISP, a provider here in the room, any perspectives on what works between an ISP and its community and what might be a caution flag?
Well, I would go along talking about the enabling type. It is a huge difference in time, schedule, and everything when a community is willing to work with you. Like we mentioned on the phone, we're currently upgrading and hoping to be done in about 6 months and have 100 meg service throughout all of the city of Goldendale. Won't help 12 Mile out, but
Next year.
maybe next year. We'll see which road we pick. But just having those barriers down so that we can do our improvements and that is a huge help. We tend to, it just makes it a little more efficient, the whole process. Sometimes the government can get bogged down by a lot of the other things.
Well, so have you, if I can interject real quick.
Yeah, no, go ahead, I got another.
Have you had experiences, not necessarily with Goldendale, but with other communities that you're willing to share here with us in terms of?
Don't have to go by name.
Right, not by name, but business models and what you found useful and what you didn't find useful. Maybe one community you were working with decided to do wholesale and that didn't work for you because, or?
Well, it's not necessarily that. Most of the communities we work in, we do offer some, 100 meg speed and that, and we have had a couple of them that have gone out, gotten state funding, and really all that's happened is they've built something. And this is just another community, I'm not saying that's what would happen here, but they've built something that then they have recurring expenses with, but don't know what to do with it. So in the end, the taxpayer ends up paying for it over and over again.
This is
And that's happened in 2 of the communities that we serve.
This is an interesting point, whether it's real estate development or service delivery. You really need to think as a city if you're really going to do that better than the private sector. But there are communities stepping up. My question would be, if the city wanted to put down in writing more specifically how it's breaking down barriers and what its agreements look like, I mean, from a data share sort of perspective, would there be a scenario whereby you'd be comfortable with saying, yeah, you can have our as-built, or would you need data share agreements, or what? We could help Larry collect as much information as might be needed to understand the system without threatening proprietary data from an ISP perspective, if you can share on that. Would you be comfortable with some level of, yeah, we're going to break down barriers, but we need a little bit of accountability?
In general terms, we have a non-disclosure agreement, and then we're pretty open, because if no one knows what we're doing, then it's no benefit to anybody, and people start redoing what we've already done.
I think that's the point, that there's a system. If everyone's contributing to a system, we can't all be building the same system to be efficient.
Well, that also goes along with your comment, sometimes competition doesn't always work.
If you get too many people competing for the same piece of the market, there could be consequences of overspending and investing. I mean, maybe you've seen that.
Yeah, just from a business background, that's the beauty of capitalism, is it takes care of those inefficiencies, and if prices aren't fair, someone does come in and that. So I've never been opposed to competition, because I'm pretty confident in our pricing and our product.
Gotcha.
but that is what our economy's programmed to do, is get rid of those inefficiencies as quickly as they show up, so kind of takes care of itself.
But my sort of takeaway is that there are ways we could get additional data that could be part of the study process or a future franchise agreement. And it's just how that's actually shared, that really the details. No, that's helpful to the study. That's a big next step. Okay, so can we sort of go around the room? I don't know, Jonathan, are you comfortable sharing what you think makes sense for a city in terms of this type of business, providing broadband service, from the helpful enabler to the kind of the wholesale delivery system? Have you thought much about it?
Without knowing kind of the infrastructure that's here, right? Does the PUD have dark fiber throughout the region? Or does anybody have dark fiber throughout the region? And maybe some of the others in the audience know. But what infrastructure is already here so that we know, are we supplementing that? Are we replacing that? Personally, without more information, I don't have a preference either way. I think with a little bit more data, like you said.
Right. And I think that we have the various forms of broadband service, including fiber, serving the community at a level which most of the citizens will be able to get higher speeds with the current level of investment. But I don't know that we know the entirety of that system, nor what gaps or opportunities it offers. So I appreciate that answer.
When you look at a 20-year goal, I think there's going to be changes. I mean, if I get my point across, what we're thinking about now, 10 years from now, it could be something different, looking at different areas. Now, how big of an area are we expanding? Could we, the city, we're covering the whole city? Is that sort of the, because we have a lot going on at the airport that we have now, and maybe even someday the city may expand just a little bit, even go out just a little ways of our city limits. We don't know. 10 years from now, who knows?
So we talked about the edges, the airport, the observatory, the industrial park. So I think it's fair to say that the primary purpose is the city proper, but that this is a Goldendale area plan in terms of connectivity and looking 20 years out. We have to expect some expansion, so I appreciate that.
Yeah.
And do you think that partnerships, enabler, wholesale provider, do you have any particular business model in mind for the city?
Not really. I think we'll just try to get whoever wants to come in that would be a good business for the city. I think it'd be hard to make one goal, yeah.
Right, so, and I think that the consequence of that is that we'll have a broad study. We won't be able to focus so much on one topic, but we'll have a broad study and you'll have a better menu to select from. I'm just wondering if anything else kind of drops off the list, like retail providers sort of by law dropped off the list from the city. But I do think that getting your perspective tonight will help us focus the study. Andy, do you have some thoughts on that?
Not really, I think everyone's kind of covered. I just think just working together to make this, work better for everyone.
Right. So you kind of are of the same philosophy that everyone should continue to play in the same sandbox.
Yep.
You don't really want anybody to take their toys and go home.
Yeah.
Well, this is an economic development tool, and we're not here to move business out of Goldendale. And I think as long as we understand that as our goal is to together help each other make it a better place to live and work, then we sort of avoid those conflict points. And I think, as we promised to do, Larry and the team, we'll try to sit down with the ISPs and do a little bit of FaceTime and really get down to it.
I think we've got to at least analyze the potential assets of each of the ISPs and the gaps at each of the ISPs. And the way that I think one alternative to consider, I guess, is that enabling piece. And when I look at enabling, I'm thinking of broadband service as a utility. And just like there's a water utility or a sewer utility or a gas utility or even electricity, they all have maps that show where those lines are. Now, each one of those I've just named has one provider. Clickatack County PUD, Avista, City of Goldendale. It's easy, we just have the one map. But right now, under broadband service or internet service, whatever you want to call it, there's 4 players. And if we can get the players to play in the sandbox together, maybe the city can be a place where they can gather information and help people make their decision on which retail provider they need to use. For instance, if HTC is providing up to 100, then it would be an economic development tool to say, hey, HTC can provide services up to 100. Now, we don't necessarily need to know how much that service costs, but we need to know the contact person. So we have, HTC can provide up to 100 megabytes, and oh, by the way, here's their current map of service, her service map. And if you want more information about what they can provide and costs and things like that, here's a telephone number to call.
So this is sort of the one-stop shop idea.
Well, it's putting a little bit of understanding to maybe being that enabler. And I don't want it to be a hindrance.
Right.
I want it to be a positive, trying to get information out and grow the utility.
So that you send the consumer to do their own shopping with the ISPs, but perhaps they share some information and you have a level of information. Right?
Well, yeah.
Well, we do have 2 out of 4 maps. We're still trying to get mapping information. We promised you a map?
I don't know. I hope so.
We're working on that. So there's more information to gather. I did want to note that we're just a few minutes from closing. I do think that we've had a really good discussion with the committee, understanding sort of your vision to grow business, to keep the place livable, to have opportunities for folks in their homes, at their place of business. Maybe those 2 are combined to serve emergency services, school, education, ag, tech, wind energy, all of it. So that's, I hope that's sort of reflected in the notes on the wall. And I think that what we want to do with this is kind of have an open discussion with folks during the public session. It's 7 o'clock, so we'll have a half-hour break. Just so you know what to expect, we'll have a sign-in sheet. Folks will be able to come to an area map. It may not, it may just be a few miles out of town, but we can put some pins at the edges. We want to know where people live and or work, so that as we're speaking to them, we get a sense of the perspective as we've done tonight. And Larry and Ethan and I spoke about making this a visioning session in which we expand on these ideas. We can leave notes up on the wall. We can expand our roundtable a bit here in the next half hour, but having more of a conversation with the public than providing the stand-up presentation. And that is kind of the goal, is to listen well and understand what people think they need, what they're receiving now, and where they want to go with that over the next 20 years. Larry, anything else before we transition?
Sounds good.
Mr. Mayor?
No.
Committee members? Good. No, this is excellent. And there will be another round of these meetings when we have the draft plan together down the road later this spring. So please, if you do have time, we thank you for your input during this session. Feel free to tell your friends and neighbors and come on down at 7 tonight, and we'll continue to discuss the future of Goldendale and broadband service. So Thanks very much.